with that, I will turn it over to our panel for this week's session, Matt Kroll, Howard Katz, Alicia Skoug, and Ryan Connor. Thank you all.
Oh, fantastic. So we want to start off today just kind of telling everybody a little bit about ourselves. I'll start. I'm Matt Kroll. I've been in engineering and land development for 20 years. I originally studied engineering, civil engineering, to be able to work outside, and spent the first 6 years of my career behind a desk doing design. Switched to work for a small luxury home builder in their land development department, and have been worked on a variety of different land development projects, small infill, semi-custom, mixed use, office, residential, and most notably now, I work for Willowsford on their development team as a director of engineering and development. We're gonna, and Alicia.
I'm Alicia Skoug. I'm with Drees Homes. I actually have been in the industry about 20 years as well. My first job out of college was selling homes for Ryan Homes. So I came up through the sales and marketing realm up to management position in sales and marketing for the same small luxury home building company he worked for. So we worked together for a few years, and then I switched to land acquisition. So at Drees, I'm area manager. I do many projects, but probably 70% of my job is land acquisition, market research, feasibility studies, that type of thing. So that's why I'm here today. It's fun. Brian?
I'm Ryan Connor with Urban Engineering. I've been in the industry for about 18 years. Started out with a small engineering firm doing much smaller projects. Spent about 5 years there, and then I moved to Urban about 13 and a half years ago. Had done all kinds of engineering projects there, from just single lots to 600 lots plans. Done commercial, residential, mixed use, shopping centers, basically all different kinds of engineering. So, and work a lot with Matt at Willowsford currently. So, Howard?
Good morning. My name's Howard Katz. I grew up in Baltimore. Went to University of Maryland. Got my master's in urban planning. Worked for Arlington County out of college and graduate school, then a civil engineering firm for a little while. I spent 17 years at Centex, and then most recently 8 years in Maryland with Michael Harris Homes, Streetscape Partners, and currently with MVR in the land group.
Great, and just by a quick show of hands, the number of people that were in session 2. So the purpose of today is really to expand upon the land acquisition session that we had last week and fold in land development, engineering and land development. And we're going to wrap up today's discussion with a case study of a project, kind of putting all the pieces together. There will be a little bit of overlap, but what we wanted to do today was essentially go into a little greater detail on the acquisition side, so that everybody gets a better understanding of some of the detailed items that we look for during study and feasibility. So, starting out, does anybody have any questions for the panel from the last week? All right, good. You guys did a good job then. Then we can go ahead and get started.
Bored them to death.
There you go. It worked pretty good. All right, so we could just start today's discussion by going over an overview of what we hope to talk about today. We're going to have a general discussion about the land development process, and continue our conversation of the land acquisition session 2, and get into some detailed conversations about some of the engineering documents and processes that are needed to go from raw land to finished lots, and then focus some on the land development portion of the process. So at the end of the day, again at the end we'll review a case study. So starting out during the land acquisition process, first you need the ground, and a lot of the home building that we do in this area, in this market, is greenfields. There is a lot of infill work that we do in Fairfax County and other areas, but a fair amount of time there, you know, home builders and developers and home builders will start with a raw piece of ground. This is one of the sites at Willowsford. As you can see, it was literally a sod farm before it was acquired by the parent company and the owner of the company. And then over the course of time, we started the engineering process, which basically took the land, identified the best use of it from a subdivision and layout standpoint, and to identify what our lot yield is based on the zoning. In this slide, the northern part of the project is a different type of zoning than the southern part of the project. You kind of see that in the middle, where you've got larger lots that are more larger lots with more open space. That's a 1 unit to 3 acres, and then on the bottom half is 1 unit to the acre. So, you know, sometimes there are split zone properties where you've got different zoning through sites. And this is, you know, this is just an example of a finished product. This is the same project, and with the houses built and the streets topped and the amenities built. So Alicia and Howard, I guess, are gonna be the, talk about the land acquisition process, or the land, some greater detail on land acquisition.
Does everybody understand what raw land is versus, have you heard that term before? So raw land is land that is unentitled. It is literally a farm, and it's when a developer or home builder comes in and takes it through entitlements, which means it gets zoned, it gets a plan approved, lots are allowed to be built on that property, and then that's what we call shovel ready. And then finished lots are when somebody actually does the paving, the utilities, that type of thing. So when you're looking to buy land and you're meeting with a farmer or someone like that, there is definitely a time equals money proposition. So if you are looking at raw land and they want to sell it as a farm as is, you cannot offer them nearly as much as what it is for a finished lot deal, because there's obviously, we pay per lot, right? There's also interest carry, so the longer you're holding that land, you have to pay interest carry on it. So there's all of that we kind of try and teach the farmers, or whoever, the landowners, farmers isn't, they might not be farming, the landowners of what the time value versus money is. Like, if you hold on to this and you help us get it rezoned, we can pay you exponentially more. Or, you know, but there is interest carry that you have to take into consideration. Zoning can take 12 to 24 months. Construction plan can take 6 to 12. Land development, 6 to 9 months. 6 months is really great. Home construction is 4 to 9 months. Probably 4 for some of you. For us, it's 6 to 9 months. And then the home settlements. So it can be from when you have a raw piece of property to when actually the first home closing is. It can be up to 4 years. So there is that type of length of time that goes into consideration when you're buying land.
So Matt kind of glossed over Willowsford kind of real quickly, but the time it took to take the piece of raw dirt, to understand the underlying zoning, to understand what your density yield can be from that first conversation with the farmer, because you're the farmer or the landowner, it's, you know, they have a value. Everyone thinks their property is worth more than everybody else. So you have to kind of craft the site and lead the landowner to the valuation. So in order to get to that conversation where you talk about money, could take 30, 60, 90 days to get to that point, at which point you can really have the conversation with the seller. And in most instances, as I discussed last week, you're competing with other builders for the same piece of real estate, especially in this marketplace where lot inventory is very low, land is scarce, and we're dealing with the proffer legislation. So you want to be able to make a correct decision financially, but also you're probably not going to close on the property until you get to that land development phase. So there are a lot of there's a lot of points before you get to this process.
Right.
And so
For Lansford's case, were you working with a single landowner or multiple landowner?
Well, the way that Willowsford bought the property, we bought the land in foreclosure from the previous developer who tried to rezone the property at a higher densities than the political will would permit. We talked about political will a little bit last time, we'll talk about it a little bit more today, but they were trying to take this land and quadruple the number of lots on it. So instead of being 400 units that we developed by right at Willowsford, they may have wanted 1,200 units. And because they couldn't get the political support to do that, they spent millions of dollars doing that, and then there was a market correction, they had to sell the property.
Does
So-
everybody know what by right means? No.
By right means that all land, particularly in the Northern Virginia area, is basically has an existing zoning or an existing allowable density or an existing allowable use. And in the case of Willowsford, and I mentioned that you've got a split zoning portion of the property, the land came as is. That's the way that it was zoned when we took it. So meaning when you develop by right, the county and the localities are required to provide infrastructure for schools, for roads, for public services. So you're allowed to go in and all you need to do is provide safe ingress, egress. Talk about Dillon rule. Talk about Dillon rule. If you want to, Howard, I don't know if you want to.
Nope.
There's a lawyer. There's a lawyer in here somewhere that can talk about Dillon rule, probably a little bit better than me. When you rezone it. What is the Dillon rule? What is the Dillon rule? Does one of the lawyers in the room in the back want to take the Dillon rule question?
Sure. The Dillon rule is basically that the localities can only do what the state government tells them to do expressly or
So every county has a comprehensive plan of what they want the land in the entire county to be used for.
So you can buy a piece
So
of
you can buy a piece of property, and it can say, oh, you're allowed 2 residential units per acre. That's what the comprehensive plan. If you buy that property and you go in for a construction plan, that's only 2 units per acre, that's by right. You're not rezoning it. And that's fine. But if you wanted more, then you have to go through zoning. Yeah.
So the intent of the slide with the time value of money is really if you've got clients that you're working with that are on the land development side or the landowner side, they may seem stressed out during the process. And that's the cost per day, I think, is really compelling. If you've got a piece of ground that costs $2,500 a day. So every day that a waiver takes to get approved is $2,500. Every day that a construction plan takes to get approved is $2,500. And every day during the land development process, if you hit a utility or delayed by weather, is $2,500 a day. So those carry costs do add up over time. Finished lots versus.
Finished lots versus raw land. So finished lots is when, say, Drees Homes is buying land that's developed already.
We already go over this.
Did we go?
Yeah.
A little bit.
Yeah, it's the same thing. So it's when he's, for example, Drees Homes is in Willowsford.
So what we're doing
And
is
so what we're doing is we contract with Willowsford, the company, and we're buying finished lots, which means the paving's in, utilities are there, ready for construction, the pad is certified, and all we need to do is go in and start building.
entitled
Entitled land is what I said, it's got plan approved through the county, it's shovel ready. You can go in and start development, the roads are not in, utilities are not in, but the plan itself is approved through the county. And then raw land is when you're working with a landowner and it is completely bare and you have to start from the beginning and work with the municipality and the engineering firms to try and get it approved for a subdivision.
Sure.
The entitled and the last two, you still have to go through a permitting process.
Yes.
So yes,
once you have a plan approved through the county, say for a subdivision, that is, you still have to get a permit in order to start development. Mhm.
So last week we talked about some developers developing the ground versus buying finished lots, and this slide represents some of the contract conditions that are necessary to clarify so that the developer or the entity taking the land through the construction process has to deliver a certain set of criteria. This is not a complete list. This is really just touching on some of the larger. So in this example, the developer is generally responsible for lots being recorded, all bonds and permits being posted. We'll talk about that later in the presentation. All the roads, base paved, which means all the roads are built to an asphalt condition, a base asphalt condition. And the stormwater management is complete and available for the basically all the community or the development, all off-lot improvements, landscaping and streetscapes. Any off-site improvement, road improvements, off-site utility extensions, and private utilities are available. We're going to talk about private utilities today. We're going to talk about gas, electric, and cable. Those are the four utilities that we provide. So basically, when the shovel ready is, everything is at the front door and the builder is ready. Some of the obligations the builder is required to in the finished lot scenario is all of the on-lot requirements. So basically, everything that's going to take to build within the property line of that parcel. So on-lot erosion control, all the permits and fees, county permits and fees to build the house. And sometimes snow removal maintenance of during the winter time if the that can slide over to the developer responsibility. I was using Willowsford's example, but essentially everything that's on lot or within the property line of the project. So the developer will take everything to the limits of the lot itself, and then the home builder will build the buildings.
So this is a land acquisition feasibility process. So I know you probably went over a lot of this last time, where we discussed, I know specifically CMAs, that type of thing you went over. Once you get to contract, which can take months to get to contract, many rounds of negotiations, every contract has probably 30 to 50 points that you end up negotiating over. Then what happens is after you get a ratified or signed contract, you have a feasibility study period. And that can be depending on what you've negotiated, 30, 45, 60, 90 days. Typically on a finished lot deal, it's 30 because they have all the information already. On a raw land deal, it ends up being a little bit longer because you have to do a lot more study and information. So I'm going to talk about just a little bit about what you need to look for during your feasibility study after you've gotten a contract. First thing we do is a perform and typically this is done before contract anyway because you need to know how much you're actually spending. So you need to know how much it's going to cost to develop. You have to, at this point, you've gotten your engineers and you've gotten bids from your developer, like a Hazel or somebody, to kind of give you an overall budget of what they think is going to cost generally to develop the property. You got to consider your time versus value. You have to calculate interest on how long you're going to carry the lot. When are you going to close on it? When are you going to have your first sale? Because during that time, you're paying interest on it. Most builders, Drees Homes is a private company, so how we work is we end up essentially borrowing money from our corporate office. They're like our bank to do the development, and we pay them interest. So we calculate worst case
scenarios,
scenarios, what we calculate in.
We calculate about
We
9%
calculate about 9% of what interest carry would be. We're not always charged that, but that's what you have to calculate.
You have to calculate.
You have to calculate in when your deposit is going up, when it's going to be returned, is it returned at the end, is it returned at the beginning, is it returned pro rata? You have to calculate in your pro forma what your sales price of your final house is, what you think the lots are going to be valued at, what pace you're going to be doing. There's a lot of assumptions that go into a pro forma. So this is typically for us, it's like a 30-page spreadsheet where you're clicking and plugging, and you're trying to get to a specific IRR.
You have to have
usually a specific margin on your house. And for us to develop a property, we have to have a margin on the land in order to get to a specific IRR that the company is targeting. So the faster you can move and the higher you can make money on it, the higher your internal rate of return is, obviously. So your pro forma, you're taking all these assumptions in, and you've got to put in contingencies of what if you find something on the land that you didn't anticipate, and then you've got to calculate, is it worth doing or is it not worth doing? Am I going to make money on it? Am I not going to make money?
That's the whole point of it.
That's the whole point of a pro forma.
So, some of the inputs for the pro forma are your land development costs, and
Generally,
during your when you're identifying all your land development costs, of course there needs to be, this is on the land development side and less on the home building side.
So it would be
before the finished lot costs.
basically studies.
You're required to go forward with studies like geotechnical studies. You have to do archaeology studies to make sure that where you're developing the land, there aren't any historical resources or natural resources. You're gonna do wetlands and streams identification. It's a real no-no. It's a real no-no for us to impact streams and wetlands as natural resources. So we as a development community really are obligated by the state, DEQ, and minimize engineers to minimize our impact on natural resources. Not to mention that when we do, there's a significant cost associated with mitigating those.
Other studies that are done during the
Other studies that are done during the land development process are transportation studies. Like what is the impact of your the effect of your community going to be on the region's transportation networks. All the politicians in Northern Virginia are really focused on transportation because that's the first thing people do when they call to complain to their local politicians is that there's too much traffic by right. The difference between by right and rezoning is by right you aren't obligated to mitigate any of the transportation
effects. So if you've got raw ground, the roads
effects. So if you've got raw ground, the roads are designed accounting for the development of your property, meaning
all the surrounding roads should account.
All the surrounding roads should account for
developed condition.
raw land being in the developed condition. That's true for schools and public utilities, etc.
Architectural design is something.
Architectural design is something is a soft cost that's done during the land development process. Whether it be architecture for if you're going to for your homes that you're building, whether it be architecture for the community centers that you're building, pool houses, etc. And landscape architecture is another consideration.
Engineering,
your civil engineering. Your civil engineering. By civil engineering, it's geotech, it's
civil design, your road and subdivision.
Your civil design, your road and subdivision costs and surveying, and
there are also inspections that are required.
There are also inspections that are required during land development. Inspections by the geotech to make sure that when the contractor's doing their work, that they're meeting the standards necessary for compaction and they're putting for compaction and they're putting the right.
And other soft costs are bonds and permits.
And other soft costs are bonds and permits. The cost for legal to process subdivision work or process zoning applications and county and municipality submissions.
Some of the hard costs that go into the land development.
Some of the hard costs that go into the land development
your
budget are
just for a sense
your
of
contractor's
scale,
costs. So just for a sense of scale, your soft costs are generally
development
5 to
budget.
7% of your
Hard
total
costs
land
are
development
about
budget.
85%.
Your hard costs are
So that's
about
where all the,
85%.
the expense
So that's
comes
where
from
all
during the land
the
development
expense
process.
comes from
And
during the
there's
land
a
development process.
5 to-
And there's usually like a 5% contingency.
10,
built into the
10,
budget.
10,
Always
10,
10.
10.
So Willowsford,
Always 10.
we use 5 because,
But you guys are good, right?
10% would be an industry standard. At Willowsford, we know the land, we know our neighbors, we know what our costs are gonna be, so we're able to drop that back because a lot of the, we've studied it for the last 8 years.
But if you're putting
So we
together,
know
you
the
got a
ground
piece of
that
raw
we're
dirt. But if you're putting together, you got a piece of raw dirt, and you're doing your initial feasibility, and you're putting together your budget and your costs, always assume the worst, because you really, maybe you've done a geotech study, maybe you know there's rock, maybe you know it's rippable, or it's dye-based, you may have to blast, but always assume, corporate's gonna say, your contingency line's too thin. We're always gonna tell you that, or your equity partner's gonna say, Howard, why are you only showing a 5% contingency? You have bond release items, you have other line items that relate to land development for when you get off a bond, but contingency, if you can put in 10, put in 10, if you put in 15, put an extra 15.
The biggest key in land development is you don't know.
The biggest key in land development is you don't know what you don't know, and I guess that's Howard's point, is that is for
in-ground utility.
the utility, in-ground utility that you, or the fiber optic line that you didn't know was there during the study period, or
Rain,
you know,
and how it affects the soil conditions.
rain and how it
But
affects the soil conditions.
The hard
So-
costs in general are
But the hard costs in general are the
contractor costs, the cost for clearing
the
grading,
contractor costs, the cost for clearing grading,
rock blasting, earthwork,
rock
ENS
blasting,
controls,
earthwork,
streets
ENS
and sidewalk
controls,
pipe work, and,
streets and
any
sidewalk pipe
structures,
work, and
bridges,
any
culverts.
structures, bridges, culverts, and
as Howard said, bond
and,
release.
as Howard said, bond release, amenities, and hardscape. So.
So you guys went over a lot of the CMA stuff last time. Every builder does it a little bit differently. I'm not gonna go over it too much. Drees, we do our own competitive market analysis. We have to go out there and we have to research every competition. We have to see what the MLS is doing. And the whole point of a CMA is to figure out where your market is, where you're gonna be able to sell homes, who's buying them and why are they buying them, who your buyer profile is, what the average square foot is. It's probably one of the most important parts of a land deal prior, that and the performa, prior to contract. That's when you should do it as part of the contract. So I know Howard probably went over most of it last week, so.
So these are some other things that you need to consider.
So
when
these
you're
are some
doing
other
land
things that you need to
acquisition.
consider
The
when
size
you're
of the
doing
pad
land
when you're buying
acquisition.
finished
The
lots.
size of the
For
pad when you're
example,
buying
if
finished
you have a
lots.
developer
For
that,
example,
has
if you have a developer that has
and the
a
pad size is
subdivision
too short,
and the
too
pad
small,
size
doesn't fit
is
your
too
product,
short,
then
too
you
small,
either need to
doesn't
find
fit
a
your
new
product,
or
then
you
you
need
either
to
need to
ask them
find
to
new
change the
product,
plan if
or you
possible,
need to ask
or
them
it may
to
be
change the
something
plan
you
if
need to
possible,
pass on.
or it may be something you need to
Environmental,
pass on.
wetlands,
Environmental,
hazards.
wetlands, hazards, I just brought an example of what a phase one site assessment is that you have to read during your study period. And it is probably the most important aspect. This one has wetlands in there too.
Finding
Of
anything that may or may
finding
not.
anything
If
that
you
may
find
or may
something
not.
hazardous, or you
If
have
you find
wetlands
something
that you
hazardous, or you have wetlands that you didn't
pay for to
anticipate
clean
that you
up
would
or
have to pay
mitigate,
for
it's
to
gonna
clean
cost
up
you
or
thousands.
mitigate,
That'll
it's
be
gonna
way
cost you
below your
thousands.
contingency
That'll be
away in a
way
hot
below
second.
your contingency away in a hot second.
Geotech is the soil and rock. Here's a
Geotech is the
report
soil
just
and
to
rock.
kinda
Here's a
show you what that
geotech
is.
report
You
just
do
to kind of
borings
show you what that is.
based on
You do
where you
borings
think your lands or
based
lots
on
are gonna
where
be,
you think your
or
lands
the
or
land
lots are
itself
gonna
to
be,
tell you if
or
there's
the
rock.
land itself to tell
If
you
the
if
soil
there's
is
rock.
bad, how do you think
If the soil
water
is bad,
gonna
how do you think
absorb
the
into
water is
there?
gonna absorb into there?
A lot of
That-
times will tell you
A
how
lot
much
of
more
times
you're gonna
will
have to spend,
tell you how
more
much
than
more
anything.
you're gonna have to
Wait a
spend,
minute, is there
more
rock?
than
Am I gonna
anything.
have to
Okay, wait a
blast
minute,
rock?
is
How
there
much
rock?
more
Am
is
I
that
gonna have to
cost?
blast rock? How much
So
more
then
is
you
that
can
gonna
go back to your
cost?
performa
So then you
and
can
change
go back
that.
to your performa
Title
and
issues.
change that.
You
Title
have to do a
issues.
title study.
You have to do a title
do it
study,
within the
and you
study
have
period
to
and
do it
find out
within the
if there's
study
anything
period and
that could
find out
affect
if
your,
there's anything
title,
that could affect your
certification, being
title
able to do
certification on
development.
being
I
able
do
to
have
do
examples
development. I
Things
do
that
have
happened with
examples
all
of
these that I'm sure
things
you
that have
can
happened with all of
discuss.
these that I'm sure you do that we can
Utilities.
discuss.
What is that? We have a lot of
Utilities,
utilities where
what is
Washington
there? We
Gas
have a
isn't
lot
out
of
there yet,
utilities
or the
where
gas,
Washington
Columbia
Gas
Gas,
isn't out there
whatever
yet,
gas
or the
company
gas,
is.
Columbia Gas,
They're like,
whatever
oh,
the
we'll
gas
come there if
company
you pay us
is.
a couple hundred
They're like, oh,
grand.
we'll come there if you'll pay us a couple hundred
Nowadays,
grand. Well, not
a lot
every,
of the green
nowadays,
Energy Star homes,
a lot of the green
you don't
Energy
need
Star
gas.
homes,
Like, okay, see
you
ya.
don't need gas. The land plan and the topography plays a big part in house construction. We do have communities where there's 12-foot basement walls because the land is sloping so bad in order to, not have to fill as much. You can play with it that way, but you need to know that in advance because you have costs in your
HOA
home
docs.
construction.
I have a sample
HOA docs.
too.
I have a sample HOA doc
This is
too.
a homeowners
This is a
association.
home
For not a
owners
very strict
association.
community
For not a
that
very
you
strict
need to
community
have recorded with the
that
county
you
if
need
you're
to
gonna
have
an
recorded
HOA
with
in
the
that
county
community
if you're gonna have an
prior to,
HOA in that community
selling
prior
homes in there
to
because that is a right of
selling homes in
refusal
there
on a
because that
contract
is a
to
right
buy
of
a home.
refusal
It's
on a
not
contract to
reviewing
buy a
your
home.
HOA
It's not reviewing your
well
HOA
as-
docs.
oh, this is more
As
environmental.
well as, oh, this is more
Architectural
environmental.
Review Board, if you have a community
Architectural
like
Review Board, if you have a
Willowsford,
community like
Willowsford, you have to read
and know what you're allowed to do and not do in the home.
And
On architectural reasoning and landscaping plan and that type of thing. I mean, it ends up a lot of times where it's a lot of costs that is not in other communities that the Architectural Review Board may require you to do on your home in that community.
Oh, this is examples, and Howard could probably.
Oh, this is
speak to
examples,
this
and
too.
Howard
So
could
I had
probably
an
speak to this
acidic
too.
soil
So I had an
situation.
acidic
So,
soil situation.
We,
So,
we're buying lots in a community.
we,
down
we're
in,
buying lots in a
Stafford
community
County.
down
But,
in Stafford
so
County.
we did our,
But,
and
so we did
we
our,
did all our
and
during study.
we did all our during study, we did all of our study on geotech, environmental, we actually got a lot of it from the developer as well. And then during a negotiation, he is still moving lot lines and that type of thing. He says, okay, well, listen, I've got better lots for you, I can move this builder over here. And we're like, okay, sure. Sign the amendment, good, gone. Next thing you know, those lots that we're building on now, we did not do borings on. We did not know what the soil was like. It has pyritic soil, which is an acidic soil that is so strong it
So
will
the
eat through concrete.
remediation of that.
So the remediation of that, come to find out, is costing us about $5,000-$6,000 a house that we did not anticipate when we
So those
first
are
wrote
the
the
type of things
contract.
that you need to know.
So those are the
and
type of
maybe
things
not
that
move
you
so
need to
quickly
know,
when you're getting
and
that
maybe not
amendment
move
for
so
better
quickly
lots.
when you get that amendment for
think
better
are
lots.
lots.
What you think are better lots.
I have an example of a covenant.
I have an
This was
example
found in
of a
title
covenant,
work.
so
We
this
did
was
title
found in the
work on
title
a
work.
piece
We
of
did
land
title
that we
work
were
on
gonna buy.
a piece of land
And
that we were gonna buy.
develop it. The
And
neighboring
we were gonna
property
develop it.
had a
The
slice
neighboring
of
property
their
had a
covenant
slice
went on
of their
their
covenant
title
went
onto
on
their property,
their
right
title
where the
onto
road
their
was gonna go.
property, right where
So
the
guess
road
what?
was gonna go.
We couldn't buy it.
So
VDOT
guess what?
wouldn't allow us to
We
put
couldn't
a
buy
road in
it.
there
VDOT
unless
wouldn't
that
allow us to
covenant
put a
had been
road in there
vacated
unless that
by the
covenant had been
neighborhood.
vacated
And the
by the
property owner
neighborhood.
didn't wanna go to
And
that
the property
neighborhood
owner
because of
didn't wanna
course
go
they
to
didn't
that
want homes
neighborhood
in their
because of
backyard
course they
type
don't
of
want
thing.
homes in
So
their
guess what
backyard
happened?
type
We
of
couldn't
thing.
close, and
So
he
guess
wasn't
what
able to
happened? We
sell his
couldn't
property.
close and he hasn't been able to sell his property.
Rock hauling. Yeah.
Rock hauling.
Blasting and
Yeah.
hauling
Rock
rock is
hauling,
really
blasting
expensive.
and hauling
You know
rock
if
is
that's
really
gonna be on the
expensive. You need to know
property.
if that's gonna be on the
We talked
property.
about
That is-
early on. I mean, we talked about topography early on, doing your land plan, having the development budget, having an earthwork analysis done early on in your study period, and how much dirt you're gonna be hauling on or off, or if you have rock, you're blasting for basements, you need to get that material out. That's probably one of the biggest line items that you need to be leery of against earthwork. The hazardous waste cleanup, again, you do the phase one environmental, there might have been a laundromat or a gas station or some other use on the property, maybe there's some tanks there. It was remediated, it was cleaned up, you got your findings, you got your approval, they have their approvals from the state. But then there might be some leftover gas that's still trapped in the ground. You may have to put a vapor barrier in the house, it drives the cost of the house up. It's important to read those line items and have again, a certified an environmental engineer review that and give you recommendations. So, cleanup can be expensive, it can drive the cost of the house
The
as
age
well.
of finished lot, we have an example. The age
where
of finished lot, we have an example
the lot was
where
certified, it was compacted.
the lot was
By the time
certified,
we
it
go
was
to take it down a year
compacted.
later,
By the
weather
time we
has
go to take it
affected
down
it,
a year
it's no
later,
longer
weather has
certified.
affected it, it's no longer a
And
certified
we,
pad.
the builder then is
And
required to
we, the
recertify
builder
it.
then is
That's an
required to
additional cost you don't
recertify
think
the pad,
about.
that's an
It's
additional
almost, I
cost
was
you don't
saying
think
to
about.
them,
It's almost, I'm
every
saying
deal,
to
there's
them, it's
something
almost,
different.
every
You never know
deal,
what
there's
you're gonna
something
get. You learn
different.
all
You
the
never know
different
what you're gonna get. You
things
learn
that
all
you're
the
like,
time about things that you're like,
that 50
huh,
gallon drum,
okay.
now I have to
So that
clean up
50 gallon drum, now I have to clean up
When
50 feet
you
around it.
push back to the underlying landowner, that's why you don't close on property until you've gotten your subdivision plans approved. You're not closing after feasibility because there are still items that are gonna come up. Obviously, title we talked about. You need to know those exceptions up front so you can go back to the landowner and make sure he gives you clear title when you do go to closing. Clear title, phase one. Most important things to a finished lot.
The phase one is the
And
environmental report.
so
They're
this is why you
important.
have study
And
periods.
so this
in
is why you
general.
have study
It's just so
periods
you
in
have
general.
realized
It's just
what
so
you're
you
dealing with
have realized
and
what you're
you
dealing
know
with
any additional
and
costs that
you
you
know any additional costs that you may have.
So once you get through the study period.
So once you get through the study period and
you've
you've negotiated the contract, then this is, we're gonna go through an example of the entitlement process from a raw piece of ground through construction, ignoring the finished lot scenario. So we get to the plans and specifications. So a couple things I want to differentiate in this conversation, in this piece of the presentation is the difference between entitlement, vesting, and construction documents. So entitlement is used to refer to the underlying zoning or the allowed zoning or density of the land.
This is the Dillon rule effect.
This is the Dillon rule effect where Virginia, the Commonwealth, I should say,
has laws in place that if you own land, you
has laws in place that if you own land, you can develop your land and that no one can generally stop doing that.
It's called an entitlement.
And it's called an entitlement. Now,
There is
during the, we
we
touched on the zoning plan,
essentially changes
that essentially changes
the
the density or use of your
Ryan's here from
property.
urban engineering. I'll let
So
him.
Ryan's here from urban engineering. I'll let him jump into the mix.
I wanted to actually step
Zoning
back
plan.
just a little bit, talking about the studies, feasibility studies. The civil engineer gets involved in that extensively. I'll get called in, and right when they're looking at a raw piece of land, and I'll be involved in preparing a due diligence report, feasibility study, grading studies. I'll evaluate the zoning and give my opinion as to the zoning. So will the attorney, typically, if they're having an attorney involved. We will look at the availability of the wet utilities, public water, public sewer, the storm sewer system. Is it on the edge of your property? We have to extend it for a long distance. Sewer. We'll do sewer studies to see vertically if we can reach the public sewer. We'll sometimes study even water availability as far as pressure and fire flow. We'll look at the environmental concerns and work with the environmental consultants and the geotech and look at the borings to see if there's rock. We can do a whole lot of different things at the feasibility period, and we're helping support and help the developer and builder assess their risk and apply budgetary values to the engineering that is going to have to happen. We'll also give input as into the amount of county fees that are necessary for every submission along the way, permitting, inspection, submission fees, etc. Because that's what really do that aspect, and that stuff can really add up. Obviously,
During
if you're not
study,
paying
your
attention
civil
to it. So
engineer.
during study, your civil engineer does become new. We're talking back and forth, and as the vision for the project sort of develops, we might change the layouts to say we discover a bunch of wetlands. Oh, okay, well we want to set the same amount of lots, but we have to make them smaller and turn the road here. How's that going to impact our tree cover and our canopy requirements and our dirt work? So it's a sort of an evolving process until something sort of gels and sticks, and then you know what you can offer on the property safely and still meet your returns, etc. So we're pretty actively involved in the
front end as well. And then now,
after that
so
point,
moving
where
on
you're
to the
actually
fact,
moving forward with the
after
project.
that point where you're actually
With
moving
the
forward with the
zoning,
project. And
as Matt said,
with the zoning,
not-
as Matt said, you're not
Rezoning means you're going to go to a higher
rezoning
zone.
means you're going to go to a
going to
higher zone
more
typically,
lots or
and you're going
more
to
square
get
footage.
more lots
It's
or
not
more
by
square
right anymore.
footage.
You're
It's not by right anymore. You're dealing with the political
the
environment.
process,
You're dealing with the public
neighbors,
process. You're dealing
higher
with
level
your neighbors at a much higher level as to
appropriate development
is
for the land.
an appropriate development for the land.
You have to be in conformance with the
You do have to be in conformance with the
It
comprehensive
lists
plan.
ranges
It
of
lists
what
sort of
allowable
ranges
use might be.
of what an allowable use might be.
At this time, when you're doing rezoning,
At this
you
time,
might
when you're doing
ask for waivers and
rezoning,
modifications
you
of
might
zoning
ask for
ordinance.
waivers and modifications
You
of
might
zoning
not-
ordinance, because
your vision for the project
you might not
allow you to do certain
your
things
vision
that
for the
would be
project might not
required.
allow you to do certain
And
things
this
that
is
are
your
going to be
time to
required
ask
of you.
for
And this
that
is your time to
allowance,
ask for
at
that
the
allowance
board action. So,
at the board action.
You're gonna
So,
do all kinds of studies.
you're going to do
for traffic,
all
transportation,
kinds of
schools,
studies for
environment,
traffic, transportation, schools,
and
environment,
present how
stormwater
you're
management
gonna
parks,
deal with those
and
things
present
on
how
this
you're going to
rezoning
deal with
plan.
those things
What am I gonna
on
do
this
to
rezoning
improve
plan.
transportation?
What am I going to do to
going
improve the transportation?
contribute to schools?
What am I going to potentially
Provide a
contribute to
parcel for a
schools
new
or
school?
provide a parcel for a
Environmental
new
studies,
school?
you're gonna have to prove
Environmental
how you're
studies,
going
you're going to have to
meet environmental
prove
regulations.
how you're going to meet the environmental
Uh,
regulations or you
since
can
you're in
exceed them.
essence asking to go to a higher
Since
use
you're in
that
essence
was,
asking to go to a higher use that was not necessarily originally intended on the property. You have to show how you're going to meet all stormwater management regulations up front.
Give parkland or provide
Potentially
contributions to
give
parkland.
parkland or provide
And
contributions to
provide affordable
parkland.
housing if you're over a certain
And
unit
even
count,
provide
you have to
affordable housing if
provide
you're over a certain unit count.
housing
You're going to have to
program,
provide affordable housing program
and then
for the
proffers,
community.
that's a
And
sticky
then
subject,
proffers.
but,
That's a sticky subject,
nevertheless,
but
they are in essence,
nevertheless, they are in
they're
essence, they're
giving to
mitigating, they're things that
the
you're
impact of
giving
your
to
additional
mitigate
density or use.
the impact of your additional
And,
density or use.
in the last session,
In the last session, I know you guys briefly talked about the proper law, and I don't think we want to go there at this moment, but it's a little more difficult than it used
The
to
zoning,
be.
when you actually go through
The
this
zoning,
process and
when you
you're
actually go through this public
gain the
process and you're
approval of this
actually
rezoning,
gain the
it doesn't
approval of this
expire.
rezoning,
You have
it doesn't
a
expire.
concept development plan,
You have a
final
concept development
development
plan,
you have a set of proffers,
final development plan, you have a set of
and
proffers.
you go to that new zone.
And you go to
This
that
does
new
not expire.
zone.
It's unlike,
This does not expire.
Zoning
It's
runs with the
unlike,
land.
yeah.
Zoning runs with the land, so you always have that zone. So again, if you're dealing with the farmer or a friend who owns this property, and you take it through entitlements, it's gonna change the real estate taxes, because you're going from a piece of ground that might be 1 house per acre to something that's townhouses at 10 per acre. They're gonna, once it's approved and the zone's changed, the county's gonna assess it based on the new zone. So you gotta be taking that into consideration, especially if you run into a downturn in the market, and all of a sudden now I've entitled a piece of property and have greater density on it, now I'm paying more taxes.
Possible ag taxes.
And possible ag taxes, right, correct.
oh, so here, go ahead and hit the
Oh,
next.
so here,
So here,
go ahead and hit the next, Matt.
is a couple
So
sample
here
pages from the
is
zoning
a couple
plan.
sample pages from a zoning plan.
And zoning plan typically is gonna be.
And zoning plan typically is going to
20
be
sheets roughly.
10
This
to
is in essence
20
two of
sheets
them.
roughly.
There's a
This
lot
is
more
in
components
essence
to it, but,
2 of them. There's a lot more
there's
components
going to
to it,
be
but
illustrative.
there's going to be illustrative exhibits of a layout showing how your proposed higher use fits within and around the community. You're going to have, here we're showing like the type of architecture on the left-hand side that you will be proposing, because you have to sell your project to the county and the board of supervisors, sell it to the community that it's the right choice, that the houses are going to look good, that you have the proper buffers between the existing community and your community, and that you're offering amenities that would suit the community and suit the area and be consistent with the property around it. We also get into some level of preliminary engineering on these zoning plans. There you can see a road section on the left. We're showing the type and width of road that we're going to provide. We also list, I can't read it here, but we list the modifications to the zoning ordinance or the public facilities manual that we're going to adjust to make our development work. Commonly when you're when you're trying to do a rezoning and fit it in some of these, this is an infill parcel in Fairfax County, you have to modify it a little bit to make it work. It's, the more general basic standards aren't working for you, and you're asking for that modification.
The preliminary plat is where you.
The preliminary plat is where you.
The preliminary plat is where you're
this is
going
residential. The preliminary plat is where you're going to do your.
In a by right standpoint, you can do them
In a by right standpoint, you can do them in a rezoning standpoint, but I'm going to get more of a by right. The preliminary plat is where we're going to lay out our lots and do some preliminary engineering, show the road, show the utilities, show how they're going to connect, show how the road network is going to work, show conceptually what trees we're going to save, show the wetlands that we know to exist at the time of the preliminary plat. We're going to show all this information and present it to the county planning staff as a way to vest the property. We talk about vesting up here to show that in the case of, for instance, Willowsford, the raw land that Matt showed earlier, it was about 400 lots. We're going to show all those lots laid out and how we believe they're going to be, and show that road network, and go through a review process with the county where we can vet out all these issues, and both the developer and the county know and agree that yes, in a by right development, this layout works, this transportation network works, your lot count's correct, this is your total land, you've met your density requirements, here are your side, front, rear yards, the minimums, and all those facets. And upon approval of the preliminary plat, you in essence reach vesting that you can proceed with that subdivision.
You can also do preliminary plats
forward. You can also do preliminary plats associated with rezoned property. Spokane County, they're required to do that as well, even after you do the rezoning. You still have to do preliminary plat. You're rehashing a lot of things that you figured out during the rezoning. But generally, when people are speaking about preliminary plats, they're talking about by right.
It is a conceptual layout.
It is a conceptual layout. It can change if you change it substantially after you have the approval of this preliminary plat. You might have to go in and get interpretation that says you're still in substantial conformance. Worst case, you have to go back and adjust your preliminary plat, which you don't want to do. It is a limited level of detail. You're showing just enough engineering so that the staff gets comfortable that you're making the right choices, and you're not going to have some major issue at time of construction plans.
But one thing to add to what Ryan was saying was that you should think about a zoning plan. It never expires. That's your entitlement. That's what you're entitled to build. A preliminary plat expands upon the level of detail from a rezoning application that identifies what your design criteria is going to be for the construction plan. You may put on in a detailed road sections. You're going to look at some of the transportation networks that wouldn't necessarily be studied and evaluated. And, I would say that the preliminary plat also has a five-year expiration. Lawmakers in Richmond in the last several sessions have extended the vesting rights for preliminary plats over the course of time. To assist with landowners and developers that are maybe waiting out a downturn in the real estate cycle. So you're vesting basically the number of lots that you're permitted to build and the design criteria at the time that the preliminary plat was.
And the preliminary plat will have.
And the preliminary plat will have conditions on it, notations establishing, we try to get those all worked out such that, what we've agreed upon with staff at that time, because we might be years and years and years later before you get to certain areas of the project.
Everybody looks back to that preliminary, what do we agree on?
Everybody looks back to that preliminary, what do we agree on at this time? Obviously, you have to meet the code requirements, but there's some gray areas where you establish conditional notes in the preliminary plats that are quite important. So, this is just one page from a preliminary plat. This is Willowsford. This is a project that Matt and I are working on.
Right now, this is one page
reviewed right now. This is one page of, it's like 17. It's a pretty small section, but preliminary plats have very limited detail. Here we're just depicting the lots, their areas, the roads, conceptual water, sewer. We don't show storm sewer at this time. We have a pond shown there for stormwater management. Again, very conceptual. And primarily, the county's looking at it to make sure that you're meeting the zoning criteria of the zone that you're in, whether it be a by right zone, or in some cases, again, you've already rezoned it, and they're looking again to make sure that you meet those criteria. And of course, the road network is very important here.
We have a question.
I have a question. Do you mind going over the whole, like, the order of what you put in first when you have a raw piece of land?
There's so many plans that you
Like,
talked about.
there's so many plans. You talked about comprehensive plans, there's construction plans, there's an erosion control set of plans, master plan, that are,
Do you want to know the sequence in the field? Do you want to know the sequence in the field as the site's developed, or do you want to know the improvement? Okay.
The comprehensive plan is something the county does, it is not something, we have to abide by their
So it's not something
comprehensive
we
plan.
And the
So
comp
it's not
plan's
something we do.
reviewed, and the comp plan's reviewed, usually on a cycle within the jurisdiction, so Fairfax County reviews the comprehensive plan every 4 years or every 2 years, they'll do comp plan amendments. Loudoun County is currently going through an Envision Loudoun process, where they're reviewing the entire comprehensive plan for the county right now. Prince William County also is looking at it, so, the comp plan is the guide for how they want to see the jurisdiction zoning implements. And then the zoning implements the land use plan, so then your zoning implements that plan.
Right, and so, from our engineering
Right, and so,
perspective,
from our engineering perspective, the plan sequence is you would submit potentially a rezoning if you want to upzone your property, or if you're going to proceed by right, then you're submitting preliminary plats, then you're submitting construction plans, then you're submitting record plats.
There's a whole host of documents along the way.
There's a whole host of documents along the way, and we'll talk about a few in here.
We actually do go in
detail
sequence.
later.
We actually do go in sequence in which they, so
Yeah.
it's zoning if you choose to do it, preliminary construction and subdivision, and we'll get to the latter two.
The construction.
Next.
Oh, yeah.
The construction.
Mine are kind of.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, mine are kind of in a little order here, but, the construction plan, this is
the document.
as it states, it's the construction plan. This is the document that depicts all of the items that need to be constructed on that property or that subsection of that property, because they're commonly broken into pieces, that are required to meet the county's facility standards manual. All counties have, all jurisdictions,
have a manual
also
that
cities and
says,
towns,
this is the
have a
minimum
manual that
standard
says,
of how
this is the
wide a
minimum
road-
standard of
what
how
our curb
wide a
looks
road's
like.
gonna be,
You know,
what our curb looks like.
where do our fire hydrants go?
Where do our fire hydrants go?
How deep is our sewer? How deep is our water?
How deep is our sewer? How deep is our water?
What you need to do
Yeah,
for stormwater
and
management.
what you need to do for stormwater management, et cetera. So that construction plan, this is the primary thing that the civil engineer does for you, is the construction plans. It's gonna have all the details of the individual things you're constructing, the layout, fully designed lots,
All the utilities brought to the lots as
with
appropriate
all the utilities
laterals,
brought to the lots
sewer
as
connections.
appropriate laterals
Grading
for
and road
sewer
design, that's a
connections.
huge aspect of
Grading
it.
and road design, that's a huge aspect of
Grading,
it.
we're trying to- we need to figure out the
In grading, we
vertical
need to
elevation
figure
of
out the
everything.
vertical
Everything around you
elevation
has
of
a
everything.
precise vertical
Everything
elevation
around you
that-
has a
and
precise
you go
vertical
too high,
elevation that,
you need to bring
and
in dirt.
you go too
Too low,
high,
you get rid
you
of
need to
dirt.
bring in dirt. You go too low, you need to get rid of dirt, and dirt is very
It's a
expensive
huge
to move.
cost that's in these
It's a
budgets,
huge
and we need
cost
to-
that's in
and
these
try to
budgets, and
minimize
we need to,
dirt moving,
and try to
is one of
minimize
our
dirt
primary
moving,
goals.
is one of our primary
Secondly,
goals.
is
Secondly,
stormwater. That's a huge
is
aspect of what civil
stormwater.
engineering does.
That's a huge aspect of what civil engineer does. You know, when it rains and it pours, you've got to deal with this water. You've got to make sure this water gets captured, routed, controlled,
and delivered to the
detained,
natural stream,
cleaned, and delivered to the natural stream
in a very precise manner.
very precise manner,
State regulations, which
in
are
accordance
somewhat
with the state
recently
regulations,
a lot
which
more
are
strict than they used to be.
somewhat recently a lot more strict than they used to be.
You also have to make sure.
You also have to make sure that
you're not going to flood
some residential development that
you're not gonna
to flood houses. You're not going to have
because of,
situations where you have wet basements because of your stormwater design. So, the grading as far as
earthwork, you also have to
making sure you optimize earthwork, you also have to make sure that you
managing your water.
or properly managing your
It's a big
water.
part of what we do.
It's a big
You
part of what
also
we do.
need to make sure that
You
when
also
flush
need to
toilet
make
in a
sure
house,
that,
it
when
can
you
go
flush a
somewhere.
toilet in a
Sewer
house,
is a
it
big
can go
deal.
somewhere.
To get
Sewer is a big
it's
deal
fed by
to
gravity,
get it.
so it's very,
It's fed by gravity, so
important
it's
that,
very important that
houses right,
you get your
have
vertical
sewer,
locations, your houses right, to have sewer.
water Fire
flow.
coverage, obviously, a big
Water
deal.
and fire coverage, obviously a big deal. You need to get the most water there, but you need fire coverage, the proper flows and pressures, and we'll do studies related to
Confirming with the locality that we have.
confirming with the locality that we have the proper fire flow and pressure to serve a
and fire
house.
access for the fire
And
trucks
even
to
fire access
get
for
down
the
your
fire
roads
trucks
and turn around. That's
to
a big
get
thing
down your
County right
roads and
now.
turn around. That's a big thing in Loudoun County right now. That Matt will not want to talk about. Because he's dealing with it head on. Landscaping, erosion sediment control, we gotta make sure during construction that we don't have a bunch of dirt runoff going on other people's property or in the streams. We prepare a detailed plan on how to control that
Water quality,
sediment.
I touched on.
Water quality, I touched on.
State regulations to.
This is
for Chesapeake Bay
state
preservation.
regulations to
make
for
sure
Chesapeake
we're
Bay
not
preservation, to make sure we're not
contaminants leave our
having a
site,
bunch of
get into-
contaminants leave our site and get into
we look at
Chesapeake
floodplain to
Bay.
make sure our houses are
We
not
look at
in the
floodplain to make sure our houses are not in the
Studies related to
floodplain.
that, and deal with
We'll have to
FEMA.
do studies related to that and deal with FEMA. Environmental features,
Try very
wetlands,
hard to avoid them. In some cases you
try
can't.
very hard to avoid them. In some cases
Minimize
you
it.
can't,
And then when you
but can't, you minimize it.
We deal with
But you need to get permitting. We deal with the wetland
Soils.
consultant on that. Soils.
Soils are a big deal as well. There's
Soils are a big
geotechnical
deal as well.
consultant
There's a
that will be
geotechnical
advising
consultant
the
that
development team on the
will be
soils.
advising the development
And,
team on the soils, and
obviously, if there's a lot of rock, we don't wanna
obviously
be digging
if there's a lot of rock, we don't
and
want to
so,
be digging deep,
there's an
which is one
there's
example.
parking and amenities also need to be taken
And there's parking and amenities also need to be taken into account. The community centers that we'll design and
This is an example grading plan.
This is an example grading plan. It's also a list one. This is actually this is the Drees section, I think in the upper
this is an
upper
example
corner.
plan showing.
But this is an example plan showing in the cases where we have public road on the bottom here, we have these private little we call eyebrow streets. We have our houses and grading shown, water, sewer, storm sewer, limits of clearing, tree. We have tree saves. We have the gamut. Everything's on this. This is the grading plan. It's one sheet of.
It's one
It's
part of
70
the
sorry?
construction. It's one part of the construction.
The construction
Looking
plan.
at the level of
The
detail.
overall.
So looking at the level of detail of a preliminary plat, you can see the difference between just the preliminary level of detail versus the
And like you were saying,
construction.
the construction
And like
plan.
you were saying, the construction plan can be up to 100
this one's
pages.
7.
It is huge.
Yeah, this one's 7.
So, yeah, and they're getting bigger
70.
every year.
So yeah, and they're getting
The
bigger
more
every year.
regulations,
The more regulations, especially storm management and water quality, it's a
This
huge
is,
component of our
one of
plans.
the
This is one of the we call vertical profile or road profile. And this is where we're showing the vertical alignments and slopes of, in the case of the road. You have water that's fairly shallow, also going along the road. You have the sewer system there that's going up and down like this. That is all those vertical components we have to design and understand completely, such that when they go to construct, they can actually do it, and that every house can
This is your
actually get
sanitary
into that
sewer,
sewer
which is-
system.
This is your sanitary sewer, which is gravity sewer system. This is your water system, water distribution. When you turn on the faucets, and these dash lines are the existing grade, and then this the natural hard line is the natural, and then this hard line is the center line grade or
And
the
there's
finished grade of the road.
there's minimum and
Right,
maximum.
and there's minimum and maximum requirements for every aspect of all the things you see here, and those requirements are spelled out generally in your facility standard manual, public facilities manual, or by other jurisdictional documents. There's ranges that we have to fit in, and
This
these
is
also
one
VDOT
page
criteria.
of
This is one page of a storm management plan. This is the case where we are analyzing the water running off from our site, and we have to manage it. We have to either, in some cases, you can deliver it directly to an adequate stream. In some cases, you have to hold it back, slowly release it, so that you're not eroding a downstream natural water course. This is one page. In the case of this particular, that's one pond. This would be one page of probably 15 sheets of computation, details, narratives, and cross-sectional information to prove to the jurisdiction we've done what we need to do. When this development completes, there will not be damage to the downstream water course.
And you're not gonna flood your neighbor, which is also important. So in this slide and the next slide, what we're trying, there's a differentiation between stormwater management and BMP, which stands for best management practices, which is essentially water quality. So stormwater management, you get a really hard rain, so if you get a really hard rain, like, you know, it's really pouring, the ponds that you see out, whether they're a wet pond or dry pond, or those will fill up to a certain level, and what those are designed to do is to hold the water back and for a certain period of time, so that as you increase the amount of impervious area, and it's really quantities and wood quality is, when you have like a wooded area, if it rains, a lot of the water seeps into the natural ground system. When you pave it or put a house on it or parking lot, that water then can't get into the groundwater and needs to be treated. So if you can just think of more water running off, the stormwater management system is to hold back quantity, whereas the water quality is the BMP, or the water quality is the clean up.
I mean, when you develop land,
when you develop land, you add more impervious acreage, you're generating more runoff. The water can't seep in, or it's not being trapped inside the woods or picked up by plants. It's hitting that asphalt and it's running pretty quickly to a drainage system, and so you're increasing its speed so that it peaks at. And so the ponds are designed to intercept that water and slowly release it. We have control structures with weirs and all kinds of other pieces to it that allow it to be released at a lower rate over a longer period of time. Really, the intent is to match the original pre-development runoff curve. For lack of a better term. BMPs, or best management practices, shorter form would just be water quality. This is an example plan of a project just to the west of Willowsford, and this is where we're dealing with cleaning the water. When you have asphalt driveways and asphalt roads, there's going to be impurities added to the water that used to not be there, and the state code requires us to look at our ability to clean out phosphorus. It's just the one identifying impurity that we just look at, and when you meet the removal rate required for that particular pollutant, others naturally come along with it. But
the last step in the raw land process is the subdivision plat, and Ron, I'll just jump on this one. The subdivision, it's not the subdivision plat necessarily, but the subdivision documents, and that's the document that, it's a series of documents that work in parallel. It's a deed of subdivision, which is something that the transactional lawyers will process with the county attorney's office, and the visual picture, or I guess the visual document that goes with that is called a record plat. And so the deed and the record plat talk to each other, and actually the deed spells out in words what the record plat is, and whether it be a deed of subdivision where you're creating additional lots during the process, and the deed also dedicates public right-of-way or and easements for public utilities like sanitary sewer, stormwater, and public water. So there are a variety of other easements that are listed both on the record plat and the deed. One of the other documents that's incorporated into both the plat and the deed is the creation or is the identification of the homeowners association, which is put in place when there is maintenance responsibility for commonly owned property. So if you live in a subdivision and there is a parcel that is at the front of your community or at the back of your community that maybe has a stormwater management pond or other community features, those will generally be on commonly owned land, and the homeowners association documents spell out the maintenance responsibility of those, and the county in a lot of cases shares in the maintenance responsibility, whether whether it be a stormwater management pond or a private street. So if you move into a neighborhood, you own your lot, the lot's a private street, and all of your neighbors share in the expense of maintaining that. The county wants to make sure that the documents in the deed spell out who's responsible.
Are the new stormwater regulations making the HOA fees more expensive for new communities? Like having fire retentions and bigger stuff, is that making the HOA fees having to maintain that more expensive?
Yeah, I mean, certainly for the privately maintained B&P facilities, the HOA typically has to maintain those, and there's upwards of 2 to 4 times more of those than there used to be. So absolutely, I would say that it does. I don't actually do the HOA budgets, and Matt.
I would say fractionally, Tyler.
Yeah.
It depends on the project. It depends on the BMP facility.
Yeah.
It depends on the size of the community. So if you've got a small infill job, and all of a sudden you've got 5 rain gardens, 1 on each lot and a 5 lot, then those fees are going to increase. I would say fractionally. It's just one of the considerations.
We've gotten better over the years, and again, storm structures now that are below grade in more urbanized areas are easier to clean out, vacuum out, and clean. So whereas it was a big maintenance budget item, and maybe in the HOA, I think we've come a long way. So we've gotten better. I mean, as more legislation has put more restrictions and more controls on us, the industry has figured out how to try and get smarter about how we do our business.
So to go back about the construction plan, once the county has approved the construction plan, that's just an approved construction plan. The plat, the record plat, once that gets recorded, is the actual lots. You don't have lots on a property until you have a recorded plat.
And what we mean by recorded is you take the deed and the plat, and you go to the courthouse and you record it among the land records. So once it's recorded, then it's formally, you've converted a large parcel to many small parcels where home builders can then build their homes on, as part of the community development. So that's like the change in use. There's also a tax implication. So if you take a farm and you go through the process and you convert it to lots, then you're individually taxed on each lot, which has a.
Or you might, we're going to talk about a case study site that I developed in Maryland, and it was an office use, but it was an association, so they didn't pay tax. They were a nonprofit. So all of a sudden, it became a taxable situation where the developer was picking up, potential tax implications.
So once you get through the subdivision process, and really you can start construction at any point after you get your construction plan approved. But in order to record your record plat, you need to post public performance bonds with the county. And the reason that was put into place is in yesteryear, a developer may have started a subdivision, sold a lot to a homeowner, but not finished the street, or not built what he needed, what was committed to during the construction process. So bonds are posted with public entities to ensure completion of construction, portions of construction that are shared by public, or shared by the multiple lots. What's a bond? A bond is it's basically an insurance policy that developers have to post to guarantee to the localities that they'll complete the work. The types of bonds and when you apply for permits, the bonds are associated with the permits. Permits the actual application, the bond is the guarantee that the work will get done. The types of permits and bonds that developers generally post are VDOT or state road bonds if you're doing any work in public right-of-way or on a public street. You post a county clearing and grading bond, which basically means if you take a wooded area and you clear it, you've now created an erosion situation where if it rains, that could carry off sediment because it's running off at a higher rate. And kind of performance, which would be essentially your road and storm sewer improvements and water, you'll post a water and sewer bond with the municipality as well, just to ensure that we're complete. Other permits that doesn't require bonds are environmental permits. Those are your wetland permits. The state requires that you apply for and obtain a permit to impact or do work around environmental features like streams and wetlands.
Bonds are really expensive. I mean, really expensive. And usually it's a letter of credit or cash bond that you have to put up. So if you have a farmer that is allowing you to take it through construction plan approval, they're gonna stop. They are not gonna post bonds and they're not gonna continue. So typically that's when either the developer or a builder will come in and take it over, because they wanna post the bond and have the lots recorded in their name versus the landowner's name. And they also typically don't wanna pay the ag taxes if they can get out of it, or, you know, that type of thing. That's when it gets quite expensive, posting bonds.
And the bond obligates the person or the entity posting the bond to finish the work. There are situations where you can replace the obligation, but if you post a bond, you're required to carry the cost of that bond, and it's I think could be 1.5% or 2% of the total construction cost over the course of time. And if there's a correction in the market and the home building slows down, then that bond will have to be carried forward. As part of the bonding process, or the permit process, you're required to do inspections, and we can talk about street acceptance kind of as we fold into construction. So we have our plans, our specifications, we've posted bonds and permits, and we're ready to go to work. And then the next step would be to contract with your site contractor. There are when you go to a contractor, you're going to take your plans and specifications to them, and there's a variety of different ways you can contract the work. Generally, what most developers do is we sign turnkey land development contracts with a site contractor like William A. Hazel, S.W. Rogers, TDS. Those are companies that will manage all of the individual portions of the construction plan, such that you're only contracting with one entity that will manage all the parts and pieces of the process. Another way to do it is you could contract individually with separate contractors. You could contract with a concrete sub, you could contract with a paving sub, you could contract with a grading sub, et cetera, et cetera. But that's typically only done on the smaller projects where they're more closely managed. Most public companies require that you bid to 3 different companies just to make sure that you get a fair and balanced price for doing the work. We talked about land acquisition, where if you're selling property, you'll put out an RFI, and you'll want to get prices, and and we talked about last week, where you throw out the top number, because they're probably that person may change the deal or whatnot. With construction contracting, typically you'll see is all the contractors are going to be about the same place, and if there is a contractor that's considerably lower, you may want to go back to them during the contracting process and say, hey, did you consider, we generally just sign with them, but you need to make sure that you, we'll take it, make sure that all their considerations. So during the bid process, you'll put all of your costs lined up. We do apples to apples, where we say how much is it going to cost to clear the land, and you compare the 3, how much is it going to cost to do the different components. And if generally what you'll find is that one of those components of the construction process may be out of whack, and then you have to go back to them and ensure that your specifications in the contract are tightened up or clarified to ensure that they're not contracting a project that they can't afford to because they misbid something or whatnot.
Price is always important, obviously, in the bidding process with anything you're doing, whether it's the home construction or the land development. but do they have the manpower? It's always a good question to ask. Are you staffed to handle this job? Because Hazel, Rogers, TDS, Heritage, these are all big contractors, and they may have a contract down in Fredericksburg or up in Loudoun County somewhere. Can they manage your site and meet your timeline and your requirements? Always a good question to ask during that interview process.
Another clarification you can make in the contracting is classified versus unclassified. We talked last week about a little bit about how dirt can crush your IRRs or your profits. If there are, what I mean by classified and unclassified is if you take the geotechnical report, and your geotech is going to give you a sampling of the soil profile or the soil characteristics at different intervals or stations. Every 100 feet, for example, might be some frequency. And if you can think about the earth as an uncohesive blanket, it's never exactly the same from one place to another. You may have pockets of rock, pockets of bad soil, but as contractors identify a risk with going forward with the work, land developers may choose to do an unclassified or a classified bid if they know the land very well and they know that there aren't going to be a lot of hidden soil characteristics like clay or rock, and they may classify or make classifications in the contract that the landowner or the developer will accept the risk on soil and rock. An unclassified bid means that the contractor takes all the risk on the underlying soil types. The risk is that they're only making classifications based on the geotech report. If there's a bust in the geotech report or the borings didn't hit a certain spot, then you could be in a situation where you're renegotiating. And again, talking about last week is the amount of dirt balance or the amount of on-site or off-site dirt that is necessary to complete the job is also going to be a consideration. For example, if you have a larger site, you could, if you have an excess amount of material, you may be able to place that excess material on site versus hiring dump trucks to drive it down to the quarry and dump it in the quarry. Or if your site is short on dirt, like if it's and you need to raise your site up, then you're having to find dirt. And generally, during good construction markets, there are a lot of projects working around the area, and you can generally find close sites that may have an excess if you need to bring in dirt, and it's the cost of the dump trucks that is really the risk there. And some of the items that yes.
Quick question on classified versus unclassified. So are you talking about if your geotechnical says there's no rock and you may sign a contract with the land development contractor with that stipulation, and then if there is rock, they're going to bear the cost, and you're going to bear the cost? Is that what you're meaning by that?
Yeah, basically, and like in that example, if the geotech report shows no rock and the contractor classified his contract saying that it's based on the geotech report and it didn't show up and it shows up, then generally that would be something that you need to negotiate with at a later date. If it's different than what they assumed, essentially,
Okay.
just because it's an imperfect science. Sure. Elements of a construction contract, your scope. You're going to identify your scope, what's the work that you're going to do, general conditions, what are your exclusions, what's included in the work, and the cost to do the work and the time to do the work. And those are also based on your contract documents, which are your plans and specs, which are your construction drawings, your geotech reports, generally. There will also be stipulations for insurance requirements for the contractor to ensure that your contractor is properly insured to protect them against any catastrophic accidents on the job, and clarifying what substantial completion is or when they can get their final payment if there's a retention situation, and how it will be disputed. I'm sorry, guys. I added these fancy things in here, but I keep forgetting to push the button. The construction I kind of went into land development because or civil engineering really originally because I wanted to work out in the field, and I said I worked behind a desk for a long time, and but the one thing we didn't talk about or we focused on briefly in the beginning was the time that it takes to get a zoning, the time it takes to get a preliminary and construction plan, and time on the construction process is also critical. And some variables that could affect time for construction is mostly weather. It's as Howard indicated a little early, whether you've got manpower or equipment to deliver on time, and any you could incur delays if there's a private utility in place that you didn't know about during the planning and engineering process. Private utilities are a real kick in the teeth to a schedule, because those utilities are generally in easements and they have the right to be there. So working with separate companies to relocate their lines, they're not always motivated by the same time frame that you are as a developer. And once you finish the work, then there's the final paving and bond release street acceptance process. So I've got a couple images. Oh, thank you, Alicia. So essentially, when you go in and you've got a wooded site, you're going to knock down all the trees, you're going to move the trees, and you're going to clear the lane and set up your erosion controls. So the top two pictures are images of the clearing operation, and the lower two images are images of erosion control. So you can see on the lower two where the land is cleared, the rainwater will come down, pick up all the sediment, and then there are treatments that are in place. I think on the bottom left is a sediment trap. It holds water, so the sediment falls to the bottom, and the bottom right is a silt fence, and you'll see those on construction sites when you drive by. During the earthwork process, in order to deal with rock, which is usually a big expense, you've got on the top left, it's what you call a rock drill, and this is really cool if you get to see it in person. They basically have a giant drill that drills tiny little holes down into the rock, and then they stuff it full of dynamite, and then they have patterns that they drill in close proximity. So you've got like an area that they drill all these holes, and then the dynamite is programmed to go off at incremental time frames. So it doesn't all blast at once. It's not like the cartoons where they a big bomb goes off. What it is it's in the blasting, it's each piece of dynamite is timed so that it can work with the or I don't know if it's inertia or the power. So if you have, if I'm pushing something, I push Alicia, she may push Ryan a little harder, and Ryan may, if we're all falling in the same direction, kind of that same. So when you watch a road being blasted, it's really cool. It's kind of like someone took a carpet and flipped the carpet. The earth just heaves. It's really fun to watch for the first time, and then it gets old.
Because you have to blast.
Right. So essentially, once you blast the rock, it's broken into smaller pieces that you can move or manipulate. Then you need to take out the earth, the dirt, and move it, and then bring it back and compact it, so that because if you take firm ground and you loosen it, then you have to put it back firm so that your roads, your houses, your structures are sitting on a good foundation. Part of the engineering process, or the grading process, is you have to do an earthwork balance or an earthwork analysis, and this is just a small section at Willowsford, and this graphic basically depicts where you've got an excess of dirt and where you've got a need for fill or control fill. So the red areas indicate places where you're cutting into the ground, and your blue areas indicate places where you're filling on the ground. And kind of you can see on this graphic, there is a lot more fill than there is cut. So this particular section needed to be modified from an engineering standpoint to rebalance it, because moving dirt, moving earth can be very expensive, and you want to reduce the number of times that you touch dirt movements.
Each one of those tick marks is a plus or a minus. So when you're looking at this sheet of paper, it's saying +3 or -3. It's telling you how many feet you need to either cut or fill the site.
Right. And in this example, these have basements, so you can see the outline of the houses. And that outline shows that the houses, the basement, because it's kind of a neutral color in the middle, is essentially sitting at grade, whereas it's infill around it. So if you don't have basements, then those house pads would be all blue. Kind of if they're blue on the front or back, it would mimic the. Another part of the construction process is building and constructing the storm sewer, the public water, and the sanitary sewer. And these are for the public utilities. And top left is an example of a pipe crew working on a storm sewer structure. This is a concrete structure, and they need to be moved with heavy equipment in place at a certain grade to make sure that it drains properly. On the bottom left, you've got an example of a water line construction. And a lot of construction pipe work is really just moving pieces, it's kind of like, almost like Legos, where you're moving just really heavy pieces of Legos and connecting the dots. And you need to make sure that the dots all connect, because the civil engineering rule that we learned as freshmen is that water flows downhill. And you want to keep it in that direction. An example on the right is an example of a pump station. And if you have to build a pump station, it's not great because they're very, very expensive. But a pump station, basically where water flows downhill, and you can put it uphill when you pump it uphill. So sometimes as land developers, we have to build these very expensive pump stations. If you're in an area where there isn't natural gravity flow, or meaning the water can flow downhill naturally. And one of the last components of the land development process is road construction, where you have, when you're building these, when you're digging the pipes, you're going to dig the pipes, set the pipes, compact the fill, and on the top left, you've got a project manager who's setting the road grade, or the sub-base, as we call it. And having a good compaction for your road is key, because if your sub-base or your dirt area is not properly compacted, your pavement will fail and it'll crack over time. And there's an example of a curb crew, concrete crew that sets curb and gutter, and a stone crew on the top right that's rolling stone to get a good compaction. Of course, the paving crew, we've all seen pavers in the area. One of the last things that we do in the process is bring private utilities, and we talked about that a little earlier. And a lot of the times during the land development process, we work very hard to build the sewer, build the road, and make it look nice so that we can sell it to home purchasers. And then the utilities come in afterwards, once the houses are constructed. And the bottom picture is really kind of a lot of what we see is where utility companies come through to bring the private utilities natural gas cable, and they're digging into the work that we just did, which is what we need contingencies for.
And not patching it as nicely.
So that's essentially the construction process. Other considerations that that we'll identify is your alternate sewer and water is, we talked about pump stations a little bit. If you've got a low site, you need to pump up. If there isn't sewer and water available in lower density areas of the counties, like Prince William County has the Rural Crescent, Loudoun County has the rural policy area, and even in Fairfax County, there are areas that there isn't public sewer and water available. We talked about wetlands and streams and other off-site improvements that may be necessary, and one of the major concerns when you're buying a finished lot is to make sure that the developer has all the off-site easements in place, which means that you have the rights to build your roads or utilities to extend to the site. And now we'll turn it over to Howard.
Real quick, because I know we've been running along here, so we'll just go to the first slide. So I worked on, one more time. You can go to the slide. You're in charge.
All right.
Please, one more
Next
slide.
slide.
So I worked on a site in Montgomery County a few years back. It was the American College of Cardiology. It was an existing office building, an infill site on Old Georgetown Road, not far from NIH. The subject property had an impervious area constraint due to the high cost of downstream stormwater management improvements that would require, if we exceeded the existing office building and parking lot impervious area, we'd have to make improvements downstream. We talked about this in our conversation about stormwater management and impervious area calculations during the presentation. In Montgomery County, they also have a forest conservation law, which requires a minimum forest threshold, at least at this site, of 2 acres. And there were 2 different categories. A category 1 was retained forest, and a category 2 was a conservation easement. These are some of the natural resources that we need to take into consideration when we're doing the initial land planning, working with our civil engineer. The approved plan needed to incorporate a tot lot. We incorporated it into the environmental site design feature. Again, Chesapeake Bay legislation, environmental site design features, bioswales, planter boxes, rain gardens, redundancy, some of the topics we talked about during the presentation. And we need to provide a pedestrian connection from Old Georgetown Road to the adjacent subdivision. So, we'll go to the next slide. So anyway, real quick, back up. So, one more time, sorry. So, this was a piece of property zoned R60, which was a by right zone. I could go in there and go into subdivision, but I wanted to increase the density above what the 6 per acre might be by right zoning. So I was going to provide affordable dwelling units, or in Montgomery County called moderately priced dwelling units, so that I could increase the density. Again, I started this process in 2010 when I contracted for it. I didn't close on it for almost 3 years later, and there were plenty of months before the property was contracted before I actually got to that point. So, the proposed development again was an R60 option with MPDUs. We ultimately wound up with 29 singles and 5 affordable dwelling units. Again, the process we just talked about. I had a preliminary plan, a final site plan, a certified site plan, and then the record plat process. We talked about some of the waivers that you request during the process. Ryan spoke about it, it's on the cover sheet. I needed waivers on impact on critical root zones for protected trees, a public street width that had to be modified, and I requested the elimination of a sidewalk on one side of Camberley Avenue. So this is the site location real quick. Again, this is Old Georgetown Road. Going down the down the photo is towards downtown Bethesda. Again, NIH is on the bottom of the screen. Again, this was American College of Cardiology. You see the surrounding neighborhood is all single-family detached homes, and this was an office use that was sort of sitting there. We go to the next slide. This was the existing office building, so during the feasibility phase, I contracted with a contractor out of Baltimore to give me a demolition bid. So we knew it would cost to take down the building as part of my bid process. One thing I didn't realize, this had 2 levels of parking garage below grade. When we got into land development, there was an underground stream that was trapped underneath the slab of the garage. So my contingency, thank God I had contingency. So we wound up we knew we had to bring the grade up, back up the grade, because we were taking out the parking garage. So we used the rubble from the material from the building, brought that up in layers, put layers of plastic, brought up layers of plastic. So we were able to keep that groundwater below grade after being pumped out and pumped out and pumped out and pumped out. This was the initial study that we did. This was 35, I believe it was 35 singles and 6 MPDUs. This plan didn't have any pedestrian connection from the existing single-family neighborhood along Locust Avenue to Old Georgetown Road. It had a tot lot. We were taking care of stormwater management. It had open space. We probably met our tree threshold, but this concept got trashed. We went to the next concept. This was 26 singles and 10 townhouses. Again, some of the townhouses would meet the MPDU requirement. This concept, we show stormwater management, we show the tree save area, we're showing we're still not really showing that connection to Old Georgetown Road for pedestrians, but now we're showing an interparcel connection on Camberley Avenue as it cuts through the site into the adjacent Maplewood neighborhood. We continue to modify the land plan. Now you're seeing the connection through to Camberley. You're seeing a more centralized tot lot paved area. We have the stormwater management pond. It's now incorporating maybe some environmental site design features. We still haven't really kind of figured out how we're going to get the pedestrian from the adjacent neighborhood out to Old Georgetown Road. That was 32 and 5. And then we finally got to this, which was our final land plan, which was the 29 singles, small lot singles, and 5 MPDUs. Now you're showing, we're showing a walkway, a linear park that connects Old Georgetown Road through a muse out to Camberley Avenue. Camberley Avenue now connects into the adjacent Maplewood subdivision. We have our stormwater management pond. We have roughly 1.9 acres of preserved tree save adjacent to locust, as well as we created a tree save area along Old Georgetown Road. And ultimately, this project was developed after hitting the underground stream under the office building, and is nearing the final houses for construction. Yeah.
And that's it.
When did that start?
That land development project started, in like 2014. The price point of the houses, again, goes back to that market research piece I talked about last week. We thought we would be maybe 1.5 to 1.6. Then all the tear downs started to occur in Bethesda, and people were tearing down houses, smaller guys working out the back of pickup trucks, but they were still being held to environmental site design features. When you do one lot now in Fairfax County, Montgomery County, Loudoun County, you're required to do on-site environmental site design features. Again, there may be planter boxes on the sides of the house that pick up the roof drains so that the water is treated before it goes out to the street. You may have rain barrels, you may have bioswales, whatever those elements that Ryan will incorporate into the plan. The market, so people were tearing down houses in the adjacent neighborhoods and selling houses for 1.2, 1.3. We had to adjust our sales prices. We actually modified the product, and our price point's now down to like 1.3, 1.4. Yeah.
What year did you identify that property?
That actually started probably about in 2009, late 8, 9. Actually, it was a package. It was put out by a broker. It didn't go anywhere. American College of Cardiology started talking to schools about adaptive reuse of the office building as a private school. The county didn't want a school there because the school generates buses and peak hour traffic, AM and peak hour traffic, lots of traffic. So the county didn't like the school idea, and then we were able to circle back with the landowner after all that and pick the property up.
So it was 9 years.
It's ongoing, yeah, it's about 9, we're 9 years into it. Yeah.
So by right, originally you could get, it said 6 houses per acre, 9 acres, that's 54, but at the end of the day, you get 33.
Right, and in the R6, the R60 zone, you can't do townhouses. So I couldn't do attached dwellings to meet my MPDU requirement. I would have had to do a single-family detached lot for the affordable dwelling unit, and that wasn't going to work. So the MPDU ordinance allowed me that flexibility. Plus, I was giving up at least 2 acres to forest, so I was down to 7 acres. You know, how many lots can you really fit? You know, 6,000 square foot lot, maybe 4.5, 5 lots. So I wasn't really achieving my density.
I think one of the most important things is time. I think Howard, you were saying it was like an 8-year process. Am I doing my math right?
Where you're still building the neighborhood, correct?
So from 2009 to 2017,
at Willowsford. The property was acquired in 2010, and we're just now finishing one section of it. It's in 2017. When I worked at Miller Smith on the One Loudon project, and that project was zoned in 2006, and anything that goes to Alamo in the movie theater, it took 10 years, almost 10 years to get off the ground there. So the land development process from a initial acquisition and development does take a very, very long time because of the process that we do.
You want to make sure when you're contracting for the property with the land seller, you're giving yourself that time, right? So you assume that it's always going to take longer, right? So to explain to a land seller, listen, I need 3 years to get through the process, he's looking at you like you're nuts. You know, I'm going to take the property off the market, I'm going to set a price that's not changing, and you're going to get all the benefit of the market going up. Well, or it might go the reverse, the market may turn down, you may be going back to that owner and saying, I need to adjust the land price because it's not worth what it was 3 years ago. So it can either go one way or the other.
How often do we go 8, 10 years without a recession?
I think 7 years is the rule of thumb for market cycles. It's just a function of our economic.
Right, so 2008, right, 2007, 6, whatever that was, we started to hit the bottom. 2008 really hit bottom, and we kind of came out and we were flat, and a lot of the home builders will tell you that the market's been relatively flat. We've seen some pricing power in the market, but this is a super cycle that we're in. We're 10 years in, and so I know that I'm concerned about when that next recession is going. Inflation, wage growth, low unemployment. We know there's pricing pressure at the federal level, so interest rates are going to move. When does that, as Eric says, you know, when does this cycle end? And so you're concerned about how much money you have outstanding in engineering fees, in financing costs, in bonds, deposits, etc.
Musical chairs.
Yep.
Typically in a long project where you know it's going to be several years in sales and selling homes, you do anticipate, okay, we're probably going to have a little bit of a downturn at this point. So you hold back on your pace and you hope to be conservative in what you've spent.
Any other questions on land development that we talked about today? Well, good.
It's a lot.
That's good. Before we wrap up, I want to just promote the Women in Building Industry has an event coming up next month. It's March 20th. It is a seminar on Lead with a Handshake, appropriate interactions in the workplace between males and females. So I'm going to go to that one. I think it's will teach us some manners and what we're supposed to do and not do. So I need that help. Thank you all for coming today. John, do you have any closing comments?
I don't. Just mention the event come up. That's good.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.